Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Ward, and I am thrilled to be having a conversation today with Matthew Barber, who is the Deputy Commissioner for Police and Crime for Thames Valley. And I'm also joined by Jason Q, he's the Chief Inspector for Thames Valley Violence Reduction. Bit of background to this session. Couple of years ago, I did some training looking at problems of drugs and exploitation in young people. And I learnt about many problems. One of the things that I learnt about that I was unaware of, I'm ashamed to say before, is county lines and the involvement and the issues that we have in our young people with drugs and exploitation. So I know that in Thames Valley there is a lot of work going on, a lot of projects to try and tackle this very, very complex issue. So today we're going to talk about some of these issues and how we can have increased awareness as doctors and as parents and people who have contact with young people, and how we can get help if we've got concerns about some of this. So Matt, tell me, can we ask you to start with your kind of view on this and involvement with Thames Valley Police?
Yeah, so I think the issue of county lines specifically, but obviously there's a much wider issue around abuse of drugs and particularly violence, and that's what's behind the creation of the Thames Valley Violence Reduction Unit. The Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner has been awarded several £1 million from the Home Office to fund this project, and we're pulling together agencies from across the region. So it's police led, but it's not just driven by policing. I think that's really important, because the approach to all of these issues, whether it be specifically county lines or drug abuse or indeed serious violence, is a whole system approach. I think that's really key. So working really closely with particularly with councils and schools. Often, the perpetrators and the victims will be of school age or only recently having left school. I think it's really important we don't lose sight of that. But Rachel, in your profession, working with the health sector, everyone from the acute hospitals who will see the serious injuries that will happen to people, and when we talk about the murder rate in this country, the difference between a serious assault and a murder can either be a matter of inches of where someone's stabbed, or simply the fantastic care that people get in the NHS from those A&E teams who will stitch people back together, and the paramedics who are there on scene, and that can make all the difference. So from that sharp acute end to GPs who may simply meet people at the lowest ebb of their life about something completely unrelated, and maybe able to spot the signs of whether it's substance abuse, whether it's something else that's going on at home, those signs that you know all too well that you might be the first person in authority to see. And so the Violence Reduction Unit is about bringing together all of those agencies, so we have a whole system approach, and we don't just deal with the sticking plaster. We absolutely need to respond. When the public report a crime or when an incident's happening, the police need to be there, and they will be. But actually, just as important is this generational shift to really make a difference and put the systems in place to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's a great concept, Matt. As you say, it's so complex, and it's not just down to the police, it's down to all of us. It's down to us as parents, it's down to us people working as doctors, it's down to just general society for looking out for these problems. Can I move on to you, Jason, and can I ask you, because as I said, I think county lines and it is something that actually a lot of people won't be familiar with. And I think we were talking before, is that when we often think about protecting our children from drugs, traditionally we have thought it's about protecting our children from taking drugs, and county lines is a huge thing that has become a big issue over, I'd say, the last decade or so, but I think it's still something people don't really understand what it is. Could you give us a bit of an explanation as to what it is, Jason?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rachel. I think that there's a couple of issues initially. That county lines is nothing new, although people are beginning to hear about it now, which is brilliant. County lines have been around for a long time. So county lines is labelled for the supply, usually, of crack and heroin in our more rural and countryside or county towns, as it mentioned. So a county line runner, if you like, will use the phrase going county or country, and usually from the big urban centres like London, Birmingham, who probably affect us in Thames Valley the most. So the reason it's grown in publicity is because of a number of things that Matt mentioned right at the beginning about the rising levels of serious violence, and this is obviously the reason why the Violence Reduction Unit exists now. But the size of the drug market is clearly requiring the number of people to supply that market, and that's why we have rising numbers of county lines stories, initiatives, and operations, if you like, to tackle it within the Thames Valley region. So where I'm trying to lead to is the fact that this is a growing problem, and it's basically the exploitative supply of drugs using children to basically supply a huge demand in crack and heroin. So, I mean, there are many forms of exploitation, but county lines is one of those ingredients for exploitation through drug supply. And go into a bit more detail about how to recognise the signs. And we've heard of cases where children as young as 8 have been enslaved, if you like, into a county line, and this is where the investigation of county line issues is really complex, because it merges the role of a victim and a suspect, and the investigation has to take an impartial, evidence-based view about how or what role has that county line runner, that victim or a suspect, has taken in that supply. More often than not, that victim opportunity, that legal loophole, if you like, is exploited by the exploiters, because they'll push more children into supplying drugs, county lines, because they know that we will take a victim-led approach to that. So they're very complex investigations. I've got some interesting case studies which will give some more context around what county lines are and what they look like, and it will help people then become more aware of the challenges, but also more aware of those signs, because it can affect any child from any way of life.
I think it's really useful to think about a case study, because certainly one of the things that I've learned with this is it's not necessarily the children that you would expect. So often we think about kids who are maybe, not attending school, who have been in trouble with the police, that kind of thing previously. But actually, the interesting thing with county lines is that children are chosen who do not have a history with the police, because it's actually then more difficult to trace them. Is that correct? That's your experience?
Yeah, definitely. It's vulnerability. The exploiters will recognise those vulnerable signs. So I'm not stereotyping here in the slightest, but they will seek opportunity to basically debt bond or create a bond with that young child. So a young person from a single parent family who has low income, who yearns for the latest Nike trainers, they could appear suddenly as a gift, or the latest pair of jeans, that no one else has got, but suddenly here's a valuable gift. And then once they're hooked into the exploiter's web, if you like, of toolkit of exploitation tactics, and there are vastly many. Money could be one. I'm going to entrust you with keeping this money, and then the exploiters will then fake a robbery, so that child is then in debt to that organised crime group, and then it becomes very manipulative and very harmful. So then the child suddenly has this unexplained wealth or opportunity or status, and is a member of a gang or a group of people, and is not quite suspecting this growing role within that criminality. And then so they're being groomed, and at that stage they're a victim, aren't they? They're being exploited, they're being harmed in a very coercive way, and they're being sucked into a web of manipulation where it's going down one road. And the job that the VRU is taking as a priority is to inform every sequential interception opportunity, like you mentioned there. That's obviously a bit wordy, but the GPs, what if a child was brought in with some unexplained injuries? What if a child was brought in with some sudden anxiety? And those early signs need to be unpicked and trauma informed.
Yeah.
I'll just go through. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, if that, I think that's really good information. If we could think about a case study, that I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so I was in custody not so long ago when a young woman, obviously I'll be careful around the details, I wouldn't want to identify her, but she was arrested in Thames Valley region in what's called a trap house. So that's a cuckooed address. I'll explain cuckooing in a minute, because all these terms are new. So she was serving drugs for an organised crime group from London in that premises. The premises were raided by the police during a welfare visit for the vulnerable occupant, who was also manipulated to allow that supply to take place. So now you have a double-edged investigation. You've got a vulnerable occupant, who has their own vulnerabilities that need to be safeguarded, and then you have the girl herself. Now, is she a criminal or is she a victim? We don't know at that stage. So the investigation begins. The history of that girl was that she was released under investigation for a similar offence in another town not too far away a year earlier, and that case was still ongoing. And you can see the length of these investigations add more and more risk and complexity. But because the girl had been through the criminal justice system already, she had a degree of credibility among the organised crime group, which meant that her attitude towards policing was a lot more robust, because she's been through it and she got released. So she went no comment in interview and ended up charged and remanded. She was 17. So on review, and these are the valuable lessons that come out of this. On review, I had to ensure her safeguarding, because the police have taken the drugs, they've taken the money, and she could be released back into the organised crime group empty-handed. And therefore, we could be, the police, unintentionally creating more risk to her by sending her back home, minus drugs, minus money, and in debt. Yeah. So we've caused that, obviously unintentionally. That's our job to do, to do that. But we've also got a job to safeguard her. But her story was that she was 10 or 11 and went to a care home, and she was attracted by a organised crime group in London, who began that series of events, buying her shoes, clothes, status as their top girl. The boyfriend was a leader amongst a crime group, and she was then entrusted to carry weapons, not to deliver them anywhere, but just to carry and safeguard weapons for the group. And then she was entrusted to run drugs from one place to another. And therefore, then she was entrusted by the group, because her credibility was growing, to serve drugs from an address where she was originally arrested from. She came back from that job empty-handed, and was then passed to another crime group. So she was ostracised by that group, passed to another, and exactly the same process went. Met a new boyfriend, and the story unfolded. But it was only until I gave her a pen and paper to write her story, to write down for the defence, for her own defence, really, to unpick her life. And I said, so, we can go into much more detail, but Matthew held up a Kinder Egg right at the beginning, and I said, so how were you shown to hide drugs? Where did that take place? I'm not going to go into graphic detail here, clearly, but you can use your imagination where the hiding places in a young body are. And I said, well, what age were you when you were first shown to hide drugs inside your body? She was 11. Wow. And I said, well, what situation was that? Was that around a group of men? Did they have their phones out? Yeah. And I said, do you ever consider that you might have been a victim of a serious sexual assault at that point? actually weren't just being shown to hide a commodity. You're actually being sexually assaulted and filmed and passed around by a group. She's a victim, absolute victim, and it's that's the complexity. So on the face, when I met her in custody, she was a suspect because she's been charged and remanded. Actually, when you unpick it through a trauma-informed investigation, we need to treat her as a victim because those allegations have never ever been investigated.
Absolutely.
So you can see the series of opportunities to intervene by multiple agencies are right the way through that 6-year life of hers.
And I think some people will be quite shocked by the story that you've just told, and understandably so. And thankfully, most of us do not come across those kind of situations readily. But and I know that actually this kind of thing is happening a lot. That there's so many horrendous stories out there with young people, and it can be quite unpleasant to hear these stories. But I think in some ways it's a way of really making people aware of the severity of these situations and the really, really dark side to drug trafficking and drug use that sadly exists.
I think, as you were saying, Rachel, from a parent's perspective, I think most parents, their number one concern about drugs will be their son or daughter taking drugs, and they should rightly be concerned about that because it's clearly not a good thing, and it's illegal. But I think there is that much greater risk out there that, you're right, doesn't affect everyone, but I think a lot of parents simply won't even be aware of it, and we don't seek to terrify people into the risk to their children. But I think all parents should understand what those risks are, and there is a growing risk from exploitation through drugs, rather than simply the harm that the substance itself can cause. And I think that's a real challenge to get that message across, and one that's really important for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's okay now, what I'd like to do is give people some pointers as to some of the things that you may spot and some kind of telltale signs. So I'll kind of give a few bits of things from my experience, if that's okay, to start with, and we'll see if we can all add something to that. So what often happens in this situation, to start with, so you've already mentioned, Jason, that you may see that young people suddenly have expensive items that that they can't afford to pay for, and you're not really sure where they've come from. So that's certainly an early warning sign. Then one thing that a lot of young people have is they end up with multiple mobile phones, and it may be mobile phones that are changing frequently. And this is what County Lines is based on, that it's the phone lines. So people are they're getting calls, the children are getting calls from the drug dealers as to where they need to deliver drugs, and they're getting calls from people who want to buy the drugs. And they have multiple phones which are disposed of frequently, so they can't be tracked down. The next thing is that you may notice, problems with attendance at school, and also problems with the young person not being around and not knowing where they are. And this is when things start to progress, and they may be, going on long train journeys to pick up drugs or take money through the dealers from city to city. And actually, it can get to the point where young people are missing overnight, and they may be reported missing for the first time. And that's when, this is a really serious problem. Jason, Matt, any other big warning signs that you would say are really crucial to people to look out for?
I can add a couple. You hit the nail on the head there about the phones, and that's clearly. You're right. The County Line is a commodity based on a phone line. It's a customer base. So to be guarded with that is a huge responsibility. So I would be adding contextually, the mood changes. What's happening at school. Kids do spend an awful lot of time in their schools. They may be asked to recruit other school friends too. So there's that different. So the signs to look out for are new and emerging friend groups. They're the keys, and they that can be similar for male and female kids. I think The big one though is the responsibility weighs an absolute burden. So that different mood, your child, or if you're a care home manager or someone in local authority who has frequent contact with a child, because not every child does have a parent or guardian. But if you're a care worker, it's that real knowledge about why am I faced with this sudden outburst of anxiety or mood? And I think that's the key to getting underneath what those issues are fueling. So there's a couple more for you, but
that's Matt.
Great. And I think there's a need to understand from the child's perspective about the incredibly difficult situation they found themselves in. It's really easy for us to sit here and say, well, my son or daughter would tell me if there was a problem, or talk to a teacher, talk to a responsible adult. The help's there. That's very easy to say from the comfort behind a screen, having a nice conversation of an evening. But if you're that 14-year-old girl who's being blackmailed because of some sexually explicit photographs that she was forced into sharing, try telling that to your father or your mother. That's not an easy thing to do. Some children will be threatened about what will happen to their family, their siblings, their parents. And I think we have to understand what an incredibly difficult place they find themselves in. I think one of the key things we need to achieve through the Violence Reduction Unit is having that network of professionals who are able to offer support, exactly the purpose of this conversation. And I think people should be reassured by what Jason said today, that the police do understand the nuances of this, and actually, even if it's your own child, certainly if it's someone else that talk to the police, because they are in a position to investigate, and they do understand that the chances are this child is a victim of crime and not a perpetrator. And I think it's a big challenge to get the young person to come forward with information. It's also a big step for any parent or anybody close to a child to go to the police, because they don't want their child to get in trouble. And we need to have a really grown-up conversation with parents and say it's what's in your child's best interest, and that help is out there, but it's not easy to take that first step.
No, that's a powerful point. That's an exceptionally powerful point that Matt made there. The police will always help you. We will always help you. Don't be afraid to seek that help, because we have some amazing independent access to help. So missing people will help individuals who call them for that rescue and response. So if a child does find themselves in too deep, there are organisations that they can quickly Google that will just help. I need help, and some search engines are designed to reach the top of that list to help them. So do reach out.
That's great. And I'd say from a GP perspective, so it's slightly different. It kind of ends up with the same result, which is the important thing. But if people come to see us, it may not be that it's as clear cut. It may be that, a parent just knows that something's not quite right. As you said, there's a difference in mood. There's issues with school attendance, different groups of friends, things that are appearing expensive items, and they're not quite sure what's going on. From a GP's perspective, it's first of all, it's important to have an awareness, and as a non-medic, it's just important that you know that you can talk to your GP about these things. You may think, oh, it's not a medical problem. That's not the case. If you have concerns like this, that your child may be being exploited or involved, we are a very safe place to have a discussion. We would then, make appropriate referrals for further for things to be looked at further and further assessment. But there's a couple of options there that ultimately, most importantly, end up in the same place. But it's about helping that child.
Yeah, and that safeguarding net widens too to include schools, and there are many outlets for that contextual safeguarding. So there are different, wherever that child has a footprint, there will be an organisation or a statutory or non-statutory partner who can do that help. But you're absolutely spot on to seek advice from wherever you can. But your GPs and the police will always be there.
And what would the best contact be for people if they wanted to approach the police directly? Would it be, is there a specific helpline you'd recommend, or just phoning your local station? What would you advise?
So there are a couple of outlets actually. So Childline and also Fearless.org, which is run by Crime Stoppers. They're both confidential. Childline is also confidential, but it offers immediate advice. They're absolutely crucial. Bernardo's have also got a helpline, but there are many organisations all connected to offer that immediate advice. But clearly, the police will always respond. As soon as you ring us on 101 or even in an emergency 999, don't be afraid. If you're in too deep and it's an urgent matter, ring 999. We will come. We will always come, and that's absolutely crucial. We will always help, and we're embedding, as Matt said right at the beginning, the Violence Reduction Unit are developing that trauma-informed approach. So we will look underneath what you're telling us to find the true causes of what's going on and take the appropriate action, but with you at heart, with you in mind to safeguard.
Yeah, that's great. There's a project that I wanted to mention that I thought was really important, and it's from the Children's Society. They have launched something called the Look Closer campaign. And this is basically just encouraging people generally, if you're out and about, if you're on public transport, if you spot a young person and you think there's something not right here, or you see an interaction between a young person or a child and somebody who looks like they're treating them inappropriately, your gut instinct is very powerful. And we mustn't underestimate that. And if you do see something that you think is not right, please always report it. And since this campaign has been launched, they have had thousands of people contact them with concerns about young adults and children, and it's led to a lot of people being helped.
Yeah. I think I came across a really good example of that actually at Milton Keynes at one of the shopping centres, where a security guard had detained a young person, and they just didn't feel quite right. The adult who came to collect them, they just felt this feels much more like a handler, someone who's controlling this person, than a parent. And they did absolutely the right thing. They could, coming to the end of a shift, they could have quite happily, done the paperwork and off they go. But they didn't. They called the police. They got that extra support in, and actually at the point of calling the police, the person who claimed to be the responsible adult soon disappeared. So it shows that they were quite right in that gut instinct, and it can be very difficult for people these days. There's a fear of embarrassment about getting it wrong and the consequences if you do. And I would always say better a bit of embarrassment if you ever do get it wrong, having on your conscience that you could have done something to help someone and you missed that opportunity.
Absolutely. Just to mention as well, the Children's Society, they've got a lot of really good information on their website. If you want to know more about this, or if you have some queries, they've got some really good information. Just rounding up, can I ask you both to kind of give me your key message that you think people, generally people in society or parents, what the key thing is that people should take away from this? Matt?
I think it's a better understanding of what County Lines is. It is a pretty nasty, evil business, but it is a business. And I think if we just dismiss it as something that often people think doesn't happen where they live, and I think you'd struggle to find anywhere where there isn't some impact of it. But also, some things are so bad we just don't like to talk about them. The fact is, County Lines is a business model. As Jason said, it's not a particularly new one. It's just evolved to use different technology and to grow a bit. But we spent hours talking about how successful Amazon are. The drug dealers are just becoming the Amazon of the criminal world. So we need to understand it. Policing needs to understand it in order to be able to combat it. Not to praise them for doing so. So we need to understand from a professional point of view, from the police, from health, from local authorities, how the business works. I think that's really important. But then also for us as the general public to understand, as you've said, the signs that you're looking for, but just how entrenched it can become. That it's not just a case of someone falling in with the wrong crowd and making the wrong choices. That may be how it starts. But actually understanding the level of exploitation and how deep, and as you said, Jason, how enslaved people can become to these gangs, and that's why we need to treat them as victims. And it's also why we all need to be incredibly vigilant.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And Jason, what would your key message be?
I think leading on from your really brilliant point about the Children's Society and Look Closer, I think that's reminding members of all across society, this is all of our issue. This is all of our responsibility to tackle. This isn't just the role of the police, the doctors, the teachers, the people that have the most frequent contact with our young people. It's everyone. It's absolutely everyone. It's a postman on his round. It's all of those roles. I think look closer, look beneath. If something doesn't feel right, if that child is in uniform, standing in an area where there's no school of that type anywhere, be curious. Be curious and find out, or ask, or report it and seek help. But I think the biggest point to take away is a plea to create that safe space for your child or a child within your family or your circle to talk. That safe space is absolutely crucial, because some of their behavior would warrant chastisement, kind of a telling off, that kind of parental intervention, if that makes sense, in the more traditional sense. Sometimes we need to take a step back actually to look underneath what's going on. And I think it's that safe space that a child needs to to disclose what's going on. That's my real key point.
Great. Well, look, this is a really difficult topic, isn't it? And it's something that we've said before, I don't think it's the easiest thing to listen to, but I think we owe it to our children, we owe it to our young people as adults in society to understand this and to be aware of it and to call it out and to look out for it. So thank you so much, both of you, for discussing this really, really important topic, something I feel very passionately about. I think it's been a really worthwhile conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.